Hello class and welcome to a new analysis of Myxomatosis by Philip Larkin. This poem describes a speaker who encounters a rabbit dying from myxomatosis, a deliberately introduced viral disease used in 1950s Britain to control the rabbit population. The poem's central themes are suffering and helplessness, moral detachment, and the cruelty of false hope. Myxomatosis was published in The Less Deceived in 1955. And with all that context out of the way, let's move on straight to the title. So, as I just said, myxomatosis is a highly infectious and lethal disease that affects rabbits. It was deliberately introduced by the government as a method of population control. As for the analysis of the title itself, it is a single Latinate medical term, which is quite cold, clinical, and impersonal. It refuses sentimentality from the very first word. And this really foreshadows the general sense of the rest of the poem. Let's now move on to the poem itself. I'll leave you a moment to read the poem for yourself and form your own opinion before I begin the analysis. Please pause the video. Well, to summarize this poem, a rabbit lies dying in a field from myxomatosis. He looks up at the speaker as if it was asking why this is happening. The speaker kills it with a stick, cleans the stick, and then reflects. He reflects with relief that he doesn't have to explain the full horror of the disease. The poem closes with the devastating thought that the rabbit may have believed that if he stayed still, that things would get better. They would not. Now, right off the bat, we have an example of pathetic fallacy in soundless field. The field is described as soundless, so the environment mirrors the rabbit's paralysis. Crucially, the field is soundless just like the rabbit. Both are stilled, both are trapped in a moment they cannot escape. And so this is really a ghastly, pathetic fallacy by Larkin, which makes us directly feel empathy right off the bat. Then, the opening word caught is a passive construction. So the rabbit is not the subject of an action, but the object of one. It does not move, choose, or resist. It is simply acted upon. This passivity establishes from the very first word that the animal has no agency, no role in determining its own fate. It was seized by forces entirely beyond its understanding and control. The passive voice here really reinforces the helplessness of this poor rabbit. Next, we have interesting diction in hot, inexplicable. Hot evokes fever and therefore evokes the physical suffering of the disease. Inexplicable indicates that the animal cannot understand what is happening to its body. Next, the enjambment from line 1 to line 2 carries the reader forward without pause. Time, like disease, does not stop. Then we have a great example of rhetorical questions. What trap is this? Where were its teeth concealed? These rhetorical questions are in reality the rabbit's unspoken appeal, and they reinforce the animal's total incomprehension and naivety, and they arouse our empathy precisely because of that innocence. Crucially, the questions are left entirely unanswered, reinforcing the rabbit's helplessness. There's no explanation available to the rabbit. Larkin also introduces an apostrophe here. The speaker directly addresses the dying rabbit as you, creating an uncomfortable intimacy. We are no longer observing at a distance, we are standing over it, being met by its gaze. Next, we have an example of euphemism. A sharp reply here is a very chilling phrase by Larkin. The speaker hasn't just replied, he has killed the rabbit. But he describes it not as a killing, not as mercy, but as a reply. Here, the use of language of conversation is an euphemism for this killing. This reply also ironically mirrors the rabbit's rhetorical questions from the lines before. The poem is really framed as a question and reply, a question and answer, framed as an exchange between equals, when nothing of the sort has really taken place. The quick transition into "then clean my stick" is driven by the adverb of time "then," which drops us immediately into the aftermath. You can notice that there is no pause or no reflection. The killing and the cleaning are presented as seamless and unremarkable. And obviously, the cleaning of the stick is itself deeply significant. Cleaning a weapon is usually associated with brushing aside the guilt. Making the tool clean makes also the event easier to ignore. We really see how the speaker wants to brush off any sense of guilt he might feel. And the brevity of this sentence itself, which ends quite quickly, enacts the emotional detachment. There are 4 words, and it's described as a simple act. There is no feeling. Next, we have a jarring juxtaposition, a volta, if you wish. So this word of positive emotion is placed in a context of disease and death. The speaker is relieved not to have to articulate the full horror of what the rabbit's body was undergoing. Then we have a striking moment of diction in Jaws. Jaws circles us back to the earlier image of teeth, if you remember the rabbit's rhetorical questions. But now it is no longer the teeth of a trap, which Larkin is alluding to, but the disease itself is devouring the mouth, deteriorating the mouth. Then the word suppurate, or which means to fester or to rot from the inside, arrives as a deliberate tonal rupture. After the softening euphemism of sharp reply, Larkin suddenly deploys the ugliest and most clinical word in the poem. And Larkin finally really tries to amplify the sorrow and the empathy we feel for this rabbit through dramatic irony. The rabbit believed stillness would save it. As we know, and as the speaker knows, it would not. The gap between the animal's faith and the reality it could not perceive is where the poem's deepest pathos lies. Let's now move on straight to structure, form, and rhythm. In terms of structure, the poem is a single unbroken stanza of 9 lines. There are no divisions and no visual escape, which mirrors the rabbit's total entrapment. You can notice that the poem opens with caught and ends with wait, both images of paralysis and passivity. In terms of rhythm, the poem moves in a modified iambic pentameter, broadly 10 syllables per line, but Larkin allows himself significant variation, preventing the rhythm from ever becoming smooth or reassuring. The rhyme scheme, by the way, is irregular, but present. Field, concealed, reply, by, explain, again. We can see that we have some rhymes, but we also have half rhymes in explain, again. So the approximate and slightly off rhymes, never quite resolving suits a poem about things that do not work out, hopes that do not come right. And finally, a few words to conclude this poem. We can distinguish three main themes of this poem. First of all, suffering and helplessness. From the poem's first word, caught, the rabbit is entirely without agency. The disease was introduced by human decision. The animal has no knowledge of the trap and no means of escaping it. There's also the moral detachment of the human speaker that we see in the line, a sharp reply, then clean my stick. The speaker acts, kills, and then tidies, without pause, without regret, without reflection, without any sort of feeling. But the poem is also about the cruelty of false hope. The poem's final movement is the most painful. The rabbit waited, believing that endurance would bring recovery, but it would just not. And the dramatic irony at the end is just heartbreaking. It opens a gap between the rabbit's belief and the reality the speaker and the reader already know. And on that note, thank you for having listened to my poem analysis of Myxomatosis by Philip Larkin. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.